The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Sunlight broke through the thick canopy in thin golden strips, making patterns on the forest floor. The air smelled of wet soil and moss, and every step seemed to echo softly against the trunks of the tall trees. A small group of hikers moved slowly along a narrow trail, their curiosity pulling them deeper into the woods than they had ever planned. They had been wandering for hours, talking little, each lost in the rhythm of their footsteps and the occasional rustle of birds or small animals. At first, everything seemed normal. The trail was familiar, lined with ferns and wildflowers that swayed gently in the light breeze. They joked and laughed about spotting squirrels and birds, sharing small stories about past trips, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. Something about the forest felt different today, as if it were hiding a secret that only it knew. The hikers exchanged glances from time to time, sensing a strange mix of wonder and unease. One of them, the most adventurous of the group, slowed down and pointed toward a dense cluster of trees ahead. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice low. Everyone squinted, trying to see through the thick leaves, but it looked like just more trees, until a strange shape became visible, rising between the branches. It was massive. At first, they thought it must be a trick of the light or some kind of abandoned construction equipment left to rust, but as they drew closer, the outline became clearer, larger and taller than any building they had ever seen in the forest. One of the hikers whispered, almost in disbelief, "Is that a ship?" The words hung in the air, sounding ridiculous, but the shape did not lie. It was a ship, no, a giant cruise ship, impossible in its size, stranded in the middle of the forest as if someone had simply dropped it there. The group froze. The trail had narrowed here, surrounded by thick brush, yet through the branches the enormous hull shimmered faintly under the sunlight. It was rusted in some places, covered in vines and moss in others, blending into the forest, yet impossible to miss. Its deck stretched out like a frozen ocean, complete with railings, lifeboats, and what appeared to be multiple floors of cabins. The sight was surreal. One hiker laughed nervously, brushing off the thought as a hallucination. "I've been hiking too long," he said, shaking his head, but the others could see the same reality in their own eyes. No one spoke for several moments. Every instinct told them this was dangerous, but curiosity won over fear. Slowly, cautiously, they moved closer, stepping over roots and fallen branches. The forest seemed to hold its breath around them, and with every step the ship's details became clearer. The colors of its painted hull were faded but still recognizable. The name of the cruise line partially visible, almost as if someone had tried to erase it. Windows and balconies stretched endlessly, giving the ship an eerie sense of life frozen in time. The air smelled faintly of salt, an odd scent in the middle of a forest mixing with the earthy aroma of moss and damp wood. One of the hikers, the most careful of the group, circled the ship, examining the base. There was no trail leading up to it other than the narrow path they had found. The ground around the ship was slightly sunken, as if it had settled there long ago. But no tracks, no signs of machinery, nothing to explain how something so enormous could appear in such an impossible place. "It must have been here for years," he said finally, his voice a mix of awe and confusion. But how? The question hung unanswered, swallowed by the towering trees and the strange silence of the forest. Another hiker peered through the railings, trying to catch a glimpse of the interior. The sight made them all hold their breath. Inside, it looked perfectly preserved, almost untouched. The decks were empty but immaculate, as if someone had cleaned them recently. There were lounge chairs stacked neatly, life vests in their compartments, and even tables set with fine china, though covered in a thin layer of dust. It was like stepping into a dream from a world completely separate from the one they knew. The contrast between the dense, wild forest and the polished elegance of the cruise ship made their minds reel. This was not just an abandoned vessel, it was a mystery that demanded answers. Despite their amazement, fear crept in. The hikers whispered among themselves, debating whether to go back or investigate further. Some felt an instinctive urge to run, imagining the ship might be dangerous or that they were trespassing on private property. But the sheer curiosity was stronger than caution. One of them, a young woman who had always been drawn to adventure, suggested they try to find a way inside. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying excitement mixed with apprehension. "We have to see what's inside," she said, looking at the others. They all nodded, hesitant but eager, feeling the pull of discovery. They found a small opening at the side of the ship where the vines had not fully covered the railing. It was enough to climb through, though careful steps were necessary to avoid slipping on the wet metal. As they climbed aboard, the forest seemed to fade behind them, replaced by the quiet grandeur of the ship. Each step echoed softly but not uncomfortably, almost like the ship was welcoming them. The interior was surprisingly intact. Hallways stretched long, lined with polished wood and brass fixtures. Light filtered in through large windows, illuminating rooms filled with furniture, rugs, and decorations that looked as though someone had left them only yesterday. It was breathtaking. The hikers moved slowly, almost reverently, through the decks. They found a grand staircase leading to an upper floor. Its red carpet faded but clean. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals catching the dim sunlight in a magical display. Some rooms had instruments, books, and paintings. Each discovery made them more astonished than the last. It was hard to believe that such a massive structure could exist in the middle of a forest, perfectly preserved and filled with treasures from a forgotten time. They laughed nervously at the absurdity of it all, yet deep down each of them knew this was a moment they would never forget. Outside, the forest remained still, as if guarding its secret. Occasionally a bird would fly past, startling the hikers and reminding them that this was real. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a faint metallic scent from the ship. One hiker, standing at the edge of the deck and looking out over the forest, shivered. He realized the scale of what they had found. This was not just a curiosity. It was a world within a world, an impossible sight that challenged everything he thought he knew about reality. He glanced at his companions, each absorbed in their own amazement, and felt a strange sense of shared wonder. None of them spoke for a long while, the weight of the discovery settling over them like the soft forest mist. Time seemed to move differently aboard the ship. Minutes felt like hours, and hours like minutes. They explored every accessible corner, finding small surprises along the way. Cabin rooms decorated with intricate woodwork, dining areas with crystal glasses and silver cutlery, and even a small library with rows of carefully arranged books. Everything was intact. Everything felt purposeful. The sense of history was overwhelming. One of the hikers found a small journal tucked into a drawer and began reading. The handwriting was neat, personal, and surprisingly modern. Each page hinted at stories of life aboard the ship, of people who had lived and worked there, unaware that decades later, their world would be discovered deep in the forest. Reading those words, the hikers felt an odd connection to a past they could never fully know. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the windows, the hikers reluctantly decided to leave the ship for the day. They climbed down carefully, each step bringing them back to the forest where the ordinary world awaited. Yet, even as they retraced their steps along the trail, they could not stop talking about what they had seen. The forest, once quiet and ordinary, now seemed magical, holding secrets beyond imagination. Each hiker carried a mix of excitement and disbelief, their minds spinning with possibilities. How had the ship come here? Who had left it? And most importantly, what other secrets might the forest hold? By the time they reached the edge of the forest, the first stars were appearing in the sky. They paused for a moment, looking back at the trees. The ship was hidden from view now, shrouded by the night and the thick foliage, yet it remained vividly alive in their memories, a giant mystery lying in wait, silent but impossible to ignore. They knew that this was only the beginning. The forest had revealed a single secret, but they felt certain that there were more to uncover. As they walked back toward the town, tired but exhilarated, a quiet agreement formed among them. They would return. The ship, enormous and magnificent, was not just a discovery. It was an invitation to a story far bigger than themselves. And somewhere deep in the forest, the ship waited untouched by time, ready to astonish anyone who dared to step aboard. The next morning, the hikers could barely focus on anything else. Over breakfast, they replayed the previous day's discovery in every detail. The giant cruise ship in the forest felt unreal, yet every photograph they had taken proved it was not a dream. Their phones were full of shaky videos and close-up shots of the hull, the decks, and the mysterious, untouched interior. They shared the images with friends, neighbors, and a few local authorities, expecting skepticism. Instead, curiosity spread like wildfire. People began whispering about the ship in shops, cafes, and online forums. Everyone wanted to know how such a massive vessel could appear in the forest. far from any waterway. By mid-morning, the hikers were joined by a small group of officials, including a few park rangers and an officer from the local town hall. The forest was cordoned off to prevent any accidental damage, and the hikers led the way to the hidden trail. As they walked, the forest seemed to respond to their presence. Birds flitted from branch to branch, and sunlight streaked through the leaves in patterns that made the trail look like a secret passage. The air smelled fresher than usual, carrying hints of pine and damp earth. Even the authorities used to dealing with strange situations felt a sense of awe as the ship came into view. From a distance, the ship looked even more imposing than the day before. The trees around it bent slightly under the weight of the morning light, casting shadows that made the ship appear as if it were floating in a green sea. The officials exchanged quiet words, scanning the hull and taking notes. One ranger shook his head, unable to hide a smile. "I've seen a lot in these woods," he said, "but never anything like this." The hikers nodded, remembering the feeling of stepping onto the deck the previous day. It was strange, almost magical, how something so enormous and out of place could feel alive yet silent. The team decided to explore the ship more carefully this time. Safety measures were taken. Ropes, helmets, and gloves were distributed to everyone. They approached the side opening that the hikers had found, climbing carefully onto the deck. The metal creaked slightly under their weight, but it was strong, solid as though built to withstand the ages. The interior was just as pristine as before, though closer inspection revealed small signs of decay. Faded paint, tiny cracks in the wood, and a few cobwebs. Still, nothing suggested the ship had been abandoned in the forest for decades. It was almost as if someone had intended for it to remain hidden, but maintained it in secret. As they moved deeper inside, the group discovered more of the ship's astonishing features. A grand dining hall stretched before them, with long tables, silver utensils, and neatly stacked plates. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, catching the light from the large windows which overlooked the dense forest outside. The juxtaposition of luxury against the wilderness was surreal. One of the officials, a historian who specialized in maritime vessels, knelt down to inspect a small plaque on the wall. "These are original fittings," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Everything here is authentic. This is a ship of remarkable design, and yet it's been hidden from the world." The hikers and officials moved room by room, discovering small details that made the mystery even greater. A library contained rows of books, some rare editions that seemed impossible to have survived in such a place. Musical instruments, perfectly tuned, sat in the corners of lounges. Even the cabins were fully equipped with furniture that looked as though it had been carefully arranged for guests. Every discovery added more questions. How had such a ship arrived here? Why had it been left to the forest? And most importantly, who had built it with such care, knowing it would be hidden from view? Outside, more people began to gather at the forest entrance. Word of the ship's discovery had spread quickly through social media and local news outlets. Curiosity brought journalists, amateur explorers, and photographers, all eager to catch a glimpse of the impossible sight. The hikers, once the only witnesses, now guided a stream of visitors along the narrow trail, explaining what they had seen and how they had first stumbled upon it. The ship, which had seemed like a private secret, was slowly becoming a global sensation. Cameras flashed constantly and drones hovered overhead, capturing aerial views that emphasized the surreal contrast between the forest and the enormous vessel within it. A team of architects and engineers arrived in the afternoon to assess the structure. They measured the hull, examined the decks, and even took samples of the materials used in the ship's construction. Each discovery left them more amazed. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, with materials and techniques that were ahead of its time. The engineers speculated that the ship might have been part of an experimental project or a private luxury vessel that had been deliberately concealed. The questions mounted, but the answers remained elusive. The forest seemed to hold the ship as a secret treasure, refusing to reveal its origins easily. Inside, the team continued exploring. The grand staircase led them to upper decks, where sunrooms and lounges overlooked the forest canopy. The glass was surprisingly clear, providing a view that stretched for miles. In one lounge, a piano sat untouched, as if waiting for someone to play. A journalist tentatively pressed a key, and the soft note echoed through the ship, bouncing off walls and making the space feel alive. The sound reminded everyone that this was not just a structure, but a vessel of human experience, designed for joy, comfort, and wonder. The hikers felt a strange connection to the people who had once been aboard, imagining the laughter, music, and conversations that must have filled the same rooms. The historian found a small office tucked away on the upper deck. Inside, a desk contained journals, letters, and maps. The handwriting was neat, personal, and filled with stories of journeys, parties, and even private experiments. One letter hinted at the ship's secret purpose, though it was cryptic, speaking of hidden plans and a sanctuary away from the world. Reading it, the hikers and officials exchanged puzzled glances. The ship had clearly been important to someone, carefully preserved and hidden for a reason that remained unclear. Each document they found added a layer to the mystery, making it feel as though the forest itself was a guardian of secrets too big to understand fully. As evening approached, the group decided to leave the ship temporarily. The forest was changing as the sun sank lower, and shadows stretched long across the deck. The hikers led the officials back down the narrow path, past trees that seemed to lean closer, as if curious about the visitors. The forest was quieter now, almost reverent, holding the ship in its embrace. Everyone walking the trail felt a mixture of relief and longing, unwilling to leave, yet knowing they needed to return with more equipment and experts to explore further. The sense of wonder was almost overwhelming, a feeling that would linger in their minds for a long time. Word of the discovery spread beyond the town quickly. Scientists, historians, journalists, and even curious tourists began making plans to visit. Local authorities faced the challenge of protecting the ship while allowing exploration. Temporary walkways and signs were put in place to prevent damage to the forest. The hikers, who had only intended a casual adventure, now found themselves at the center of a story that was capturing the attention of people across the country. Interviews were conducted, photographs published, and videos went viral online. The ship, once hidden and secret, was becoming a phenomenon that no one could ignore. That night, as the hikers sat around a small campfire near the edge of the forest, they spoke quietly about the day's events. The stars twinkled above them, the forest around them alive with night sounds. Each hiker felt a sense of amazement and responsibility. They had found something extraordinary, a giant cruise ship preserved in a forest that no one knew existed. It was not just the size of the ship that astonished them, but the mystery surrounding it, the unanswered questions, the possibility of history frozen in time, and the secrets hidden in every room. They realized that this discovery was bigger than themselves, something that would change their lives and the lives of everyone who came to see it. One hiker broke the silence, pointing toward the dark forest. "We only scratched the surface today," he said. "There's so much more inside. We need to come back with more people, more cameras, maybe even experts who can understand what this really is." The others nodded in agreement, their excitement growing. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night air, and the forest seemed to hum in response, a quiet acknowledgement that the ship's story was just beginning. Meanwhile, back in the forest, the ship rested silently. Its hull reflected the faint moonlight, vines clinging to the sides like fingers holding a secret. Inside, the rooms were still and empty, but every piece of furniture, every object, seemed to pulse with the memory of life it had once held. The forest, dense and mysterious, had hidden the ship for years, and now, for the first time in decades, people were beginning to uncover its story. The air carried a sense of anticipation, as if the ship itself was waiting for the next step, for the next person brave enough to explore its hidden corners. When the hikers returned the next morning, the forest seemed even quieter than before. Sunlight barely pierced the dense canopy, and mist hung low around the trees. The path to the ship was narrow, overgrown in places, but familiar now. The hikers moved carefully, knowing that more visitors would arrive soon and hoping the forest would remain undisturbed until they reached the vessel. As they approached, the giant cruise ship came into view once more, its hull glinting faintly under the soft light. To the hikers, it seemed even larger than before, as if it had grown overnight. They paused for a moment, taking in the impossible sight. Every time they looked at it, the sense of awe returned with full force. The hikers were not alone this time. A historian and expert in maritime vessels had joined them. She was small but energetic, with a notebook always ready and eyes that missed nothing. Alongside her were an architect and an engineer, both curious about the ship's construction. Cameras, drones, and measuring devices accompanied them. The forest felt different with so many people moving through it. yet it still held its quiet majesty. Birds and small animals scattered at their approach, and the occasional gust of wind made the leaves shiver. The hikers felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. They knew today would uncover more about the ship, and perhaps finally provide answers to some of the lingering questions. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was charged with energy. The historian led the way to the small office they had found previously. On the desk were stacks of journals, letters, and maps untouched since the ship had been abandoned. The papers smelled faintly of ink and aged paper, a comforting and mysterious scent that seemed to carry stories of the past. The historian opened one journal carefully, reading aloud passages that spoke of lavish parties, long journeys, and life aboard the vessel. The handwriting was elegant, each letter precise, and the stories captured the imagination immediately. The hikers listened in silence, transported to a time when the ship had sailed across oceans and hosted people who now seemed like ghosts in the forest. One letter caught their attention. It was addressed to someone whose name was partially smudged, but the contents were clear. The writer spoke of plans to keep the ship hidden, describing it as a sanctuary away from prying eyes. There were hints of experiments, advanced technology, and luxurious gatherings meant for only a select few. The words sent shivers down the hikers' spines. This was no ordinary cruise ship. It had been built with care and precision, designed to remain secret for reasons that were only beginning to make sense. The historian turned to the hikers, her eyes wide with wonder. "This ship was meant to disappear," she said softly. "Someone wanted it hidden and they succeeded, but why? That is the real question." The architect examined the ship's interior carefully. Every room, every hallway, every deck had been designed with attention to detail that seemed almost impossible for a vessel of this size. The woodwork was precise, the metal fittings solid and durable, and the layout thoughtful and elegant. The engineer took samples of the materials used in construction, noting that some were rare alloys and treated wood that could resist decay for decades. The more they studied, the more they realized how advanced the ship had been. Its technology, its design, and the quality of its materials were far beyond what they had expected. Questions swirled in everyone's mind. Who had built this ship? Why had it been hidden? And what secrets did it still hold? As they moved through the decks, the hikers and experts found more journals and letters. Each document revealed pieces of the puzzle. One journal described a journey through distant seas, meetings with influential figures, and private events aboard the ship. Another letter hinted at a hidden chamber, a place where experiments or gatherings took place away from the public eye. Maps indicated that the ship had once been docked at multiple ports, yet all records had vanished from official archives. The historian explained that this was unusual. Ships of this size, with such luxury and capacity, usually left detailed records. The absence of documentation suggested deliberate secrecy. The hikers were captivated by the stories. They imagined people walking the same corridors, sitting at the same tables, and playing the same piano they had seen in the lounge. The ship was not just a physical structure. It was a repository of human experience, frozen in time. Each room told a story, each artifact carried a memory, and the combination of the two created a sense of living history. The hikers felt a profound connection to the past, as though they were bridging decades in a single moment. Every step they took on the polished floors was a journey into another world, one hidden away by the forest for reasons unknown. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The sunlight shifted as clouds passed, creating a shifting pattern of light and shadow on the ship's deck. Occasionally, a bird would call, breaking the silence and reminding everyone of the living world surrounding the vessel. Despite the growing number of people exploring the ship, the forest maintained its quiet authority. It was as if it had chosen the hikers and the experts to uncover the story slowly, revealing just enough information to spark wonder while keeping the deeper secrets intact. The team's exploration led them to a lower deck that had not been fully examined before. Here they found storage rooms, equipment, and even laboratories. One room contained glass containers, some filled with substances that had long since dried, and tools that suggested scientific work. Another room held crates of rare artifacts, carefully packed and labeled. The engineer examined the equipment closely, noting that some of it was decades ahead of its time. The historian read aloud from a nearby journal, describing experiments in chemistry, biology, and navigation that had been conducted in secret. The hikers were amazed. The ship was not just luxurious, It was a center of innovation, a hidden hub of discovery in the middle of a forest. One hiker found a small hatch at the bottom of a storage room. It was locked with no visible key or combination. The others gathered around, speculating about what might lie beneath. The historian suggested that it could be the hidden chamber mentioned in the letters. Everyone felt a shiver of anticipation. The forest outside seemed to respond, the leaves rustling gently as if whispering encouragement. The ship had revealed so much already, yet it still held secrets, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. The day passed quickly. The team documented everything, taking photographs, notes, and samples. They measured the decks, mapped the corridors, and recorded the artifacts. The hikers were exhausted but exhilarated. They had uncovered a piece of history unlike anything they had imagined. The ship was not just a relic, it was a story waiting to be told. A mystery that connected the past to the present in a tangible way. As evening fell, they gathered on the upper deck, looking out over the forest canopy. The sun cast a golden glow on the ship, highlighting its size and elegance. The forest around it was quiet, the trees standing like silent guardians. The hikers reflected on what they had discovered. They realized that the ship had been hidden for a reason, yet it was impossible to ignore the beauty, the craftsmanship, and the stories it held. They felt privileged to be among the first to witness it, knowing that their experience was unique and fleeting. Night fell, and the group returned to their temporary camp at the edge of the forest. They were tired but restless, unable to stop thinking about the ship. Every conversation circled back to the journals, the letters, and the mysterious hatch. Each hiker felt a deep sense of curiosity, a desire to return and explore further. They knew that the ship's story was far from complete, that each discovery led to new questions. Yet they also felt a quiet satisfaction. They had uncovered a part of history, and that was a gift beyond measure. Back in the forest, the cruise ship rested silently under the moonlight. Its decks reflected the pale glow, and the shadows of the trees stretched across its hull. The journals, letters, and artifacts inside seemed almost alive, waiting for the next visitor to unlock their stories. The forest held its secret carefully, revealing enough to astonish but keeping the deeper truths hidden. The ship had survived decades in secrecy, and now it was beginning to share its past with the world, piece by piece. The hikers went to sleep that night with dreams full of corridors, journals, and hidden chambers. They imagined the people who had once walked the decks, the parties, the experiments, and the quiet moments of reflection. Each hiker felt a connection to the past, a sense that their discovery was part of a much larger story. They knew that when they returned, more secrets would be revealed and the adventure would continue. The cruise ship, enormous and mysterious, had become a living legend, and the forest around it, a silent witness to its incredible history. By the next morning, the hikers and experts were ready to return to the ship. Their minds were buzzing with questions, their notebooks full of ideas, and their hearts filled with anticipation. They knew that the ship's story was far from complete, and that each new visit would bring discoveries that could astonish the world. As they walked along the narrow forest path, they felt a deep respect for the place that had hidden the ship for so long. The forest had kept its secret well, but now it had chosen to share it, and the hikers were ready to listen. The morning air was crisp as the hikers and the experts made their way through the forest once again. Birds called softly from the treetops, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating a patchwork of light and shadow on the narrow trail. Every step toward the ship brought a renewed sense of excitement. Today they were prepared to spend the entire day exploring, documenting, and uncovering more of the secrets hidden within the enormous vessel. Everyone was quiet, speaking in hushed tones, as if even the smallest noise might disturb the ship itself. As they approached, the giant cruise ship emerged from the trees, its size and majesty impossible to ignore. The hull reflected the early sunlight, and the shadows of the forest seemed to cling to it like a protective cloak. The hikers felt their hearts beat faster. After days of curiosity, questions, and anticipation, they were about to step inside once more. The ship had become a place of wonder and mystery, and the forest surrounding it gave the feeling that it existed in a world apart from their own. The team entered carefully through the side opening they had discovered previously. The decks creaked slightly under their weight, but everything remained solid and strong. Inside, the air was cooler, carrying the faint scent of aged wood, metal, and the lingering hints of the ocean it was once meant to sail. Each room seemed to hold a story, a memory frozen in time. The hikers felt a mix of awe and reverence as they moved through the halls, careful not to disturb anything. Every detail, the polished floors, the brass fixtures, the neatly arranged furniture, made it clear that this ship had been built with care, and that its creators had intended it to be perfect. They started on the main deck, where sunlight poured through the large windows. A grand ballroom stretched before them, empty but majestic, with chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and polished floors that reflected the light in dazzling patterns. The hikers walked slowly, imagining the music that might have once filled the space, the laughter and conversation of guests, and the footsteps of people who had walked here decades ago. One of the hikers pressed a key on a grand piano in the corner, and the soft notes seemed to awaken the echoes of the past. The sound filled the room, bouncing off the walls, and for a moment, it felt as though the ship had come alive again. The historian led the group to the upper decks, where sunrooms and lounges overlooked the forest canopy. Large glass windows provided a view that stretched for miles, showing the forest in its full beauty. The contrast between the wild, untamed trees outside and the luxurious, controlled interior inside was almost surreal. One hiker pressed her hand against the glass, feeling a strange connection between the ship and the forest. It was as if the two existed together, one supporting the other, creating a perfect harmony between human creation and nature. As they explored further, they discovered small rooms and hidden corners that seemed to contain the heart of the ship's mysteries. A laboratory tucked away on a lower deck held instruments, glass containers, and scientific equipment that had been carefully preserved. The engineer examined the tools, marveling at their precision and sophistication. Some appeared to be decades ahead of their time, suggesting that the ship had been used for experiments or research that had remained secret. The hikers were fascinated, peering over the experts' shoulders and imagining the work that might have been done in this hidden room. In another room, they found crates filled with artifacts, delicate sculptures, rare books, and objects that seemed ceremonial. The historian carefully opened each crate, documenting the contents and reading aloud from journals that described the items in detail. Some of the artifacts were linked to places far from the forest, hinting at the ship's journeys across oceans and continents. Each discovery added a layer of mystery. The ship was not only a vessel of luxury, it had been a vessel of knowledge, culture, and secrets. The hikers could hardly contain their excitement, moving from room to room, each new finding more astonishing than the last. One of the hikers discovered a set of stairs leading to a previously unexplored deck below. The others followed cautiously, and at the bottom they found a series of locked doors and hatches. The historian noted that these might be the hidden chambers mentioned in some of the letters and journals. The hikers gathered around, examining the locks, the mechanisms, and the surrounding walls. It was clear that whoever had built the ship had gone to great lengths to keep these areas secret. The air in the lower deck was cooler and slightly musty, but it carried a sense of anticipation, as if the rooms themselves were waiting to reveal their secrets to those brave enough to enter. Time seemed to slow as they explored the ship. Each room was a new adventure filled with objects, stories, and traces of the people who had once been aboard. A lounge contained musical instruments perfectly tuned and ready to play. A library held books that were rare and valuable, some annotated with personal notes. The dining rooms had silverware and fine china, arranged meticulously, almost as if the guests were expected to return at any moment. The hikers could not stop marveling at the attention to detail, the care taken to preserve the ship's interiors, and the sheer scale of the vessel itself. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow across the decks. The hikers took turns examining a small hatch they had discovered earlier, trying to imagine what lay beneath. Some of the letters suggested it contained experiments, secrets, or even treasures meant to remain hidden. Everyone felt a shiver of excitement, knowing that a single twist of a key or a combination could reveal something extraordinary. They made plans to return with proper tools, determined to unlock the hatch safely and discover what had been concealed for so long. As the day went on, the hikers and experts moved to the outer decks, taking in the view of the forest from the ship's vantage point. The forest stretched endlessly, green and dense, with sunlight glinting off leaves and branches. The hikers felt a sense of insignificance in the face of such natural beauty, yet they also felt a connection to the world within the ship. The vessel was a bridge between human ingenuity and nature, a testament to what people could create and what the forest could protect. Each hiker felt a mix of wonder, humility, and inspiration as they looked out over the endless trees. The team decided to explore some of the cabins that had not been touched before. Each cabin was unique, decorated with furniture, artwork, and personal effects. Some contained journals, others maps, and a few even had personal letters tucked away in drawers. The historian read passages aloud, describing life aboard the ship, the experiences of guests and crew, and the moments of joy and curiosity that had once filled these rooms. The hikers listened in silence, imagining the lives of people they would never meet, but felt a strange connection to. The ship had become more than a mystery. It had become a living story. As evening approached, the sunlight dimmed, casting long shadows across the decks and halls. The hikers and experts gathered in the main lounge, reflecting on the day's discoveries. They shared observations, speculations, and questions, realizing that each room they had explored added to the story, but also deepened the mystery. The ship had revealed much, yet so much remained unknown. There were doors yet unopened, letters unread, and rooms unexplored. The hikers felt a sense of awe, knowing that the adventure was far from over. The forest outside grew quiet as the sun set, and the first stars began to appear. The hikers took one last walk along the deck, looking out over the treetops. The ship, enormous and silent, seemed almost alive in the fading light, holding its secrets close while sharing a few glimpses with those who were brave enough to enter. The forest embraced the vessel, creating a perfect balance between mystery and revelation. The hikers felt privileged to witness it, knowing that their experience was unique and that the ship would continue to astonish anyone who came after them. Night fell, and the group made their way back to their camp at the edge of the forest. They were tired but exhilarated, their minds full of images, sounds, and stories from the ship. Each hiker reflected on the day, thinking about the lives that had once existed aboard the vessel, the secrets still waiting to be discovered, and the incredible experience of stepping into a world hidden for decades. The ship had become more than a discovery. It was a bridge to the past, a testament to human creativity, and a mystery that would continue to captivate anyone who encountered it. As they lay down to sleep, the hikers dreamed of the ship, the hidden chambers, and the endless possibilities that awaited them. They imagined new rooms, artifacts, and letters that might be uncovered on future visits. Each hiker felt a sense of anticipation and excitement, knowing that the ship had more to reveal and that they were among the first to experience its wonders. The forest, quiet and protective, seemed to watch over them, as if approving of their curiosity and care. The next morning promised another day of exploration, discovery, and astonishment. The hikers were ready, filled with questions and excitement, eager to return to the ship and uncover the remaining mysteries. The forest had revealed much, but the ship still held its secrets close, waiting for the right moment and the right people to reveal them.